The night always holds secrets unseen by the eye. Behind the darkness, there are whispers that not everyone can hear, footsteps that shouldn't exist, and shadows that move on their own in the corner of the room. This story isn't just a tale to scare you, it's something that may have happened, or could be happening right now, closer than you think. Listen carefully, and make sure you're not alone while hearing it. My name is Bayu. I'm not an experienced fisherman, but I've been working on fishing boats long enough to understand the rhythm of the sea. Usually, I work on local boats that operate within Indonesian waters. But this time, it's different. I joined the Samudrajaya, a fishing vessel with a crew of 9, including myself and the captain. Our captain, Pak Surya, is an old man with a face as tough as the sea itself. He has spent decades sailing. The sea is more honest than the land, he often says while staring at the waves. Among the crew, there's Pak Derman, the eldest, a quiet man who speaks only when necessary. Despite his silence, you can tell he's seen it all. Then there's Ryan, the youngest besides me. He jokes around a lot, but he has a strange fear of deep waters. He once told me, "I can swim, but I always feel like something down there could pull me under any time." We also have Danny and Hiru, longtime friends who've been fishing together for years. They see the sea as paradise, not a place of fear. This voyage is different because we have a special permit to fish in foreign waters, a place rarely touched by Indonesian fishermen. A huge opportunity, they said. I didn't care much, I just wanted to work and earn my share. We set sail that evening. The sea breeze was cool, the waves were calm. I looked back at the shrinking coastline. This trip seemed promising. I was terribly wrong. The first day passed without trouble. We settled into our routines and adjusted to the ship. But that night, during dinner on deck, Pak Derman brought up something unsettling. "Do you know," he started, "many fishing boats have disappeared in these waters." Ryan stopped chewing. "You mean, sunk?" Pak Derman shook his head. "No. Vanished. No wreckage, no trace. Just gone." A heavy silence fell over us, broken only by the sound of waves. Danny chuckled. "Come on, the sea is huge. Boats get lost all the time." "This is different," Pak Derman insisted, his voice firm. Months after they disappeared, another boat claimed to have seen them. Still out there. But their ship was empty. A chill ran down my spine. I enjoy horror stories, but hearing one from a seasoned fisherman at sea felt different. Captain Surya sipped his coffee in silence. I studied his face, hoping he'd dismiss the story as nonsense. But his expression remained serious. I sighed, shaking off my unease. Probably just a way to pass the time. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off ever since we crossed into these waters. I woke up around midnight. I had fallen asleep on deck, lying on a pile of nets, enjoying the sea breeze. But something disturbed me. I heard a voice. At first, it was faint, like the whisper of the wind against the waves. But as I listened, it grew clearer. Someone was speaking. I opened my eyes. Darkness surrounded me. The sea below rippled under the dim glow of the moon. I sat up, straining to hear. The voice came again. This time, closer. Someone was calling. I stood and walked to the ship's edge, peering down. Nothing. Just water, endless and dark. I exhaled, shaking my head. Probably my imagination. But as I turned back, I saw something. At the far end of the deck, near the wheelhouse, someone was standing there. My breath caught. Everyone should have been asleep. Who was that? I blinked, trying to focus. But the longer I stared, the figure had no face. A chill shot through my body. I took a step back, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I blinked again. And the figure was gone. The next morning, I kept my mouth shut about what I'd seen. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But then, something happened. We were hauling in the fishing nets when Ryan suddenly froze. He stood still on the deck, staring out at the sea, eyes wide and unblinking. "Hey, Ryan!" Danny called out. No response. I walked over and touched his shoulder. Ryan turned to me and I nearly recoiled. His eyes were empty. His lips moved, whispering something so faint I barely caught it. "They're waving." I turned to look in the direction he was staring. Nothing. Just the sea, stretching endlessly. But then, in the distance, amidst the waves, a hand was waving. We all saw it. That hand. Emerging from the sea, waving as if signaling for help. Then it disappeared. Ryan collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air. Packderman rushed over, splashing water on his face. "Ryan! Wake up! Are you okay?" Slowly, Ryan's eyes fluttered open. His face was pale. There was someone there, his voice trembled. I heard them calling me." No one spoke. Captain Surya, who had been quiet the entire time, finally broke the silence. "From now on," he said, his voice low and firm, "if you hear someone calling you from the sea, never look." We turned to him, unsure of what he meant. "Those who are down there never truly leave," he continued. "And if you stare at them too long, they'll take you with them." I clenched my fists. For the first time, I started to feel like we shouldn't be here. After Ryan woke up, we tried to move on. We worked in silence, focusing on hauling in the nets. But there was tension in the air. Nobody dared to talk about what we saw. By late afternoon, the sky turned cloudy, and the wind picked up. Danny climbed onto the mast to check for incoming storms. But instead of looking at the sky, he froze, staring at something beyond the waves. "Guys," Donnie's voice was shaky. There's a boat out there." We turned in the direction he was pointing. A few hundred meters away, a ship drifted on the water. But something was wrong. It was too still. No movement. No ripples around it. The boat looked old, its wooden planks blackened as if burned by the sun. The sails were torn, fluttering lifelessly in the wind. And the worst part? There was no crew. The boat sat in the middle of the sea, abandoned, yet it didn't seem empty. Captain Surya's expression darkened. "Turn the ship around." "But," Cap Hero started. "Now." No one argued. We turned the boat away, but as we moved, a bell rang from the ghost ship. Once. Twice. As if calling someone. I felt an ice-cold chill run down my back. Then I noticed something else. Ryan was staring at it, his lips slightly parted, as if listening to something only he could hear. That night, no one spoke about the abandoned boat. We pretended it never happened. But the sea has its own way of reminding you of things you want to forget. It started with footsteps. I was lying in my bunk, eyes half closed, when I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps on the wooden deck above. At first, I thought it was one of the crew. But then I realized something strange. The sound of the footsteps didn't match the movement of the boat. They didn't sway with the ship's rhythm. They were too steady. I sat up. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe I was just paranoid. But then I heard it again. This time, inside the cabin. A single step. Another. It was right outside my door. I held my breath. Then a knock. Light. Gentle. Like someone politely asking to be let in. I didn't move. The knocking stopped. Silence. I exhaled, relieved. But just as I was about to lie down again, I saw it. The door handle twisted slightly. Something was trying to come in. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told Danny what happened. He frowned but didn't look surprised. "You're not the only one," he muttered. "What do you mean?" I asked. He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Then he leaned in. Last night, I heard voices. My stomach dropped. What kind of voices? Donnie's face paled. It sounded like us. What? I heard your voice. I heard Pacderman's voice. They were talking. Whispering outside my cabin. I felt a chill. What were they saying? I asked. Danny hesitated. They were calling my name. I swallowed hard. We looked at each other, knowing what this meant. Something was on this boat with us. And it was trying to sound like us. That night, it rained. Heavy droplets pounded against the wooden deck. The wind howled through the rigging. I was standing on night watch, holding a lantern, when I saw something at the edge of the deck. A man. He stood near the bow, facing the sea. His clothes were soaked, but he didn't move. He wore an old yellow raincoat, the kind fishermen used decades ago. His head was slightly tilted, as if listening to the waves. I felt my stomach twist. No one on our crew wore a raincoat like that. I gripped the lantern tightly. Who's there? The man didn't answer. I took a step closer. The dim light illuminated his figure. His hands were too long. His fingers, too thin. I swallowed hard. Who are you? Then, he slowly turned to me. And I saw his face. There was nothing there. No eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, featureless skin under the hood of his raincoat. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The figure tilted its head further, as if curious. Then, it whispered. You shouldn't have come here. The lantern in my hand flickered violently, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything. And when I lit it again, the man was gone. The next morning, I told Captain Surya what I saw. He listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he didn't ask questions. He just gave a single order. We're leaving. The crew was confused. We still had fishing to do. But the captain wasn't having it. We're not staying here, he said firmly. Not one more night. We followed his orders. We packed up, pulled in the nets, and changed course. For the first time, I felt relief. But as we sailed away, I glanced back at the water. And my blood turned cold. Just below the surface, a shadow was following our boat. It moved effortlessly beneath the waves, keeping pace with us. Then, just before disappearing into the depths, I saw a hand reach up from the water. Not waving this time. Pulling something down. We sailed in silence, the crew uneasy after what happened the night before. Captain Surya ordered us to stay alert, but he refused to explain why we were leaving so suddenly. Pacderman, usually calm, was fidgeting. I finally gathered the courage to ask. Pac, do you know something? He looked at me, hesitant. Then he sighed. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. What do you mean? He lowered his voice. Years ago, another boat went through these waters. They saw the same thing, a faceless man in a raincoat. I felt a chill. The crew ignored it at first. But then, one by one, they started disappearing. I swallowed. Disappearing? How? They'd go to sleep in their cabins, and never wake up. I felt my breath hitch. Doors locked from the inside. No signs of struggle. Just, gone. I gripped the railing tightly. And the ones who survived? I asked. Pacderman shook his head. Only one man made it back. He left the sea forever. I exhaled slowly. And then, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What was the name of that boat? I asked. Pacderman hesitated. Then he whispered. Samudrajaya. The same name as our ship. That night, it was my turn for the night watch again. I wasn't thrilled about it, not after everything that had happened. But orders were orders. The waves were calm, and for a moment, I thought maybe we had escaped whatever was haunting us. Then, I heard it. Gurgling. like someone choking on water. I turned to the side of the boat, peering into the sea. The water was dark, almost black. And then, I saw it. A face. Just beneath the surface. A human face, pale and bloated, its eyes staring right at me. I stepped back, heart hammering. The face slowly opened its mouth. And I heard it whisper. "Help me." I gasped. The face lunged upward, arms reaching out of the water. I fell backward, scrambling away. But when I looked again, the sea was empty. Like nothing had ever been there. The next morning, I rushed to tell the crew. But before I could speak, Captain Surya called for an emergency roll call. Someone was missing. We searched every corner of the boat. But Danny was gone. His bunk was untouched. His things were still there. But he wasn't. No signs of struggle. No clues. Just, gone. Captain Surya clenched his jaw. "No one is allowed to be alone from now on. Always stay in pairs." No one argued. Because we all knew Danny didn't just fall overboard. Something took him. By noon, the sky turned gray. The sea was eerily still. Hiru and I were assigned to check the fishing nets. We pulled them up carefully, hoping for a distraction. Instead, we found something that made my stomach turn. A piece of rope, tangled in the net. But it wasn't normal rope. It was stained with blood. "Where the hell did this come from?" Hiru muttered, untangling it. I didn't answer. Because as we pulled the rest of the net up, something else was caught inside. Something wrapped in old, tattered cloth. Hiru hesitated, then slowly pulled it out. We unraveled the cloth, revealing what was inside. A human jawbone. Still attached to a piece of rotting flesh. Hiru dropped it instantly. We stared at each other, our breathing shaky. And then, from the ocean, a deep, guttural whisper drifted through the air. "He is still here." We ran. We stormed into the captain's quarters, slamming the door behind us. "We need to turn back." I gasped. "Something's hunting us." Captain Surya remained silent. Then, slowly, he opened a drawer in his desk. Inside was a yellowed, old newspaper. He handed it to me. The headline made my blood run cold. "Fishing vessel Samudrajaya lost at sea, no survivors found." I looked at him, confused. "But, that's our ship." Captain Surya nodded grimly. "That's because we were never supposed to leave." I felt my hands go cold. The sea around us groaned. The boat creaked as if something massive was shifting beneath us. Captain Surya stood, gripping the wheel tightly. "This ship is a grave," he whispered. "And the dead don't like to be disturbed." A loud thud echoed from the deck. Something had climbed aboard. We stood frozen in the captain's quarters, listening. The sound of slow, wet footsteps echoed across the deck. Thud. 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 Whoever or whatever had climbed aboard was moving. Packderman gripped his knife. Hiru swallowed hard. No one dared to speak. Then, we heard a voice. "Help me." It was Danny. Our missing crewmate. Hiru shot forward, ready to rush outside. But Captain Surya grabbed his arm. "No." Hiru's face twisted in anger. "But it's Danny. He's alive." Captain Surya's expression was grim. "Listen." We fell silent. The voice came again. "Help me." But something was wrong. It was too slow. Too mechanical. Like a recording being played back. A cold dread seeped into my bones. That wasn't Danny. It was something pretending to be him. The footsteps grew closer. Then, they stopped. Right outside the captain's quarters. The wooden floor creaked under the weight of something standing there. A slow, deep breath rattled from the other side of the door. Hiru gripped his fishing knife. Packderman grabbed a harpoon. I reached for anything sharp, my hands trembling. Then knock. soft, gentle, like before. Then a voice. "Let me in." I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding. We said nothing. But the shadow beneath the door started moving. It stretched unnaturally, creeping under the gap, slipping into the room like a pool of black water. Hiro gasped and stabbed it with his knife. The shadow screamed. A high, piercing wail that rattled the walls. The shadow snapped back, retreating like a living thing, slithering under the door and vanishing. Then, silence. But we knew one thing. It wasn't gone. Just waiting. We didn't sleep that night. By dawn, the sky was eerily clear, the water too still. We thought maybe, just maybe, we had survived the night. Then Hiro gasped. "No way." We turned. And our stomachs dropped. The abandoned ship was back. Floating right next to us. The same torn sails. The same blackened wood. Only this time, it wasn't empty. Figures stood on the deck, watching us. Their skin was pale, stretched too tight over their faces. Their mouths hung open, moving, but no sound came out. And at the center of them was Danny. Or something wearing his face. "Help me," he mouthed. But we didn't move. Because behind him, something else stood. A tall, faceless figure in a yellow raincoat. Its hand rested on Donnie's shoulder. Then, the ship began to drift away, disappearing into the mist. Danny never looked away. Until he was gone. Pac broke the silence. "We need to end this." Captain Surya's jaw tightened. "We're leaving these waters now." Hiro, still shaking, asked, "But what if it follows us?" Pac took a deep breath. "This isn't just a ghost," he muttered. "It's a curse." Hiro and I exchanged nervous glances. "What do you mean?" I asked. Pac stared at the horizon. "Some places in the ocean shouldn't be disturbed. There are waters where the dead don't rest. And if you enter them..." He turned to us, his expression grim. "You become part of them." A sickening realization hit me. That's why the other crew never returned. That's why Danny was taken. We had sailed into dead waters. And now, it wanted more. The crew worked frantically, hoisting the sails, steering away from the cursed waters. But as we moved, I looked down at the sea. And my breath caught. Hands. Hundreds of hands. Pale, bloated, reaching up from beneath the surface. Trying to pull us down. I staggered back, heart racing. Then, from the depths, a single face rose to the surface. Danny. His lips moved. And this time, I could hear it. A whisper carried by the wind. "You can't leave." Then, in the distance, the ghost ship's bell rang once. Twice. And a third time. The water beneath us lurched. And then, the ship began to sink. Water rushed onto the deck, swallowing our feet as the Samudra began to tilt. The hands beneath the surface clawed at the wood, dragging us down. The ship groaned, as if the ocean itself was claiming it. Pac shouted, "Get to the lifeboats. Now." We scrambled, slipping on the soaked planks, struggling against the pull of the water. Hiro grabbed my arm. "We're not gonna make it." I looked at Captain Surya, expecting him to call out orders. But he wasn't moving. He was staring at the sea, his face pale. I followed his gaze. And my blood ran cold. There, standing on the flooded deck, was Danny. Or at least, what was left of him. His skin was bloated, his eyes were pitch black, his mouth twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. He lifted one hand, and pointed at me. Then, in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "Stay." The ship lurched violently, and I lost my footing, sliding toward the open sea. I barely managed to grab a rope, my legs dangling over the edge. Below me, the hands reached up. One brushed against my ankle, ice-cold fingers curling around me. I screamed. Pac-Derman rushed over, hacking at the hands with his knife. The grip loosened, and I pulled myself up, gasping. Captain Surya snapped out of his trance. Go. We ran toward the lifeboats, but then the entire ship tipped sideways, and we were thrown into the ocean. I hit the water hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. The ocean closed over me, the world above blurring into darkness. I kicked, trying to swim up, but something wrapped around my ankle. A hand. I looked down. A pale, bloated corpse stared up at me, its mouth wide open in a silent scream. More hands reached from the dark abyss, pulling me down, their cold fingers clawing at my clothes, my skin. I thrashed, my chest burning for air. Above me, I saw the lifeboat floating Hiru and Pac-Derman desperately searching for me. I tried to scream, but only bubbles escaped. The hands tightened their grip. And then a shadow loomed beneath me. Something massive was rising from the deep. A ship. The ghost ship. Its hull was covered in barnacles and decay, its sails torn, its deck filled with watching figures. I locked eyes with Danny. He grinned. And then I was ripped away. I gasped awake, choking on air. I was no longer in the water. I was on the ghost ship. The deck was wet and rotten, covered in a thick, black slime. A cold mist clung to the air. I turned, my heart pounding. The crew, or what was left of them, stood motionless. Pale. Lifeless. Staring. And in front of them stood the faceless man in the yellow raincoat. He tilted his head. Then, slowly, he raised his hand. The entire ship shuddered. And the mist began to move. Shapes formed in the fog, shadows of screaming sailors, their bodies twisting as if trapped in an eternal drowning. The faceless man pointed at me. A voice whispered in my head. You do not belong. And suddenly, the entire ship tilted backward. And I was falling. I crashed onto the deck, pain exploding through my body. The mist swirled around me, whispering, taunting. Then something shifted beneath the ship. A deep, rumbling sound. Like breathing. The entire ocean seemed to pulse. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a haunted ship. It wasn't just cursed waters. There was something alive down here. Something ancient. And it wanted me. The faceless man stepped forward, his presence crushing, his body towering over me. His voice echoed in my head. You are already ours. I tried to scream. And the ship split open beneath me. I woke up with a gasp. Coughing. Shaking. I was on a wooden deck. Not the ghost ship. The lifeboat. Hiru and Pac-Derman were above me, their faces pale, their hands gripping my shoulders. Breathe. Breathe. Hiru shouted. I coughed out seawater, my lungs burning. My head was spinning. I was back. I looked around, the ghost ship was gone. The ocean was eerily calm. But something was wrong. I could still hear the whispers. Still feel the cold. And then Pac-Derman paled. Look at your arm. I looked down. Fingers. Faint, blackened handprints wrapped around my skin. Like something had been holding me. Hiru swallowed hard. You were gone. You were under for too long. But then he hesitated. Then what? I asked, my voice hoarse. Pac-Derman exhaled shakily. Then the ocean spat you back out. A shiver crawled down my spine. Because I knew I wasn't supposed to be here. Something had let me go. Or worse, something had sent me back for a reason. I couldn't stop staring at my arm. The blackened handprints were still there, burned into my skin like a stain from something not human. I rubbed at them, hoping they would fade. They didn't. Pac-Derman and Hiru exchanged worried glances. We need to leave these waters, Pac-Derman muttered. Hiru gritted his teeth. We've been trying. But no matter how far we go, it's like. He hesitated, his face pale. Like we're going in circles, I finished. And I was right. The sun had barely moved. The waves felt the same. The ocean wasn't letting us leave. Captain Surya, gripping the tiller, looked exhausted. His face was gaunt, his lips dry. "This sea is cursed," he murmured. "And it's marked you." I swallowed hard. "Marked me?" Packderman exhaled. "You didn't escape, kid." His voice was grim. "You were sent back." A cold shiver crawled down my spine. Sent back for what? We rode in silence. The further we drifted, the thicker the mist became. Then, we saw them. Wooden rafts, dozens of them floating on the waves. Each one carried a body. Some were wrapped in cloth, some left exposed, their bloated faces frozen in terror. Hira's voice trembled. "What the hell is this?" Packderman's face darkened. "A burial at sea." I swallowed hard. "But why are they all here?" No one answered. Then, Captain Surya tensed. "Don't move." His eyes locked onto one of the corpses. My blood ran cold. One of them was staring at us. Its eyes were open. And then, it moved. The corpse twitched. Its head turned, jerky and unnatural, eyes fixed on me. Then, its mouth opened. Water poured out, black and thick, bubbling like tar. One by one, the other bodies began to move. Some sat up. Some twisted their necks at impossible angles. The mist tightened around us, heavy like a shroud. And then, the first corpse spoke. "Give him back." The whisper was wet, broken, like a voice dragged from the deep. I froze. It was talking about me. Hira grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." Packderman snapped the oars, paddling furiously. The figures on the rafts rose, stepping into the water. And instead of sinking, they walked. Coming for me. I rowed, my arms burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the drowned were faster. The water didn't slow them down. Packderman hurled a flare. The red light illuminated the horror-pale, rotting faces, empty eyes locked onto me. The closest one reached for the boat. I swung an oar, cracking it across its skull. Its head snapped back, then twisted forward again. Unfazed. It grabbed my wrist. I screamed, the icy grip burning through my skin. And then, I felt something pulling me down. Not just them. The ocean itself. The sea wanted me back. A deep, distant bell rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. And suddenly, the drowned stopped. They froze, head snapping toward the horizon. Then, without a sound, they sank back into the water, their bodies vanishing beneath the waves. The mist lifted slightly. Packderman was panting. Hira was shaking. Captain Surya clenched his fists. "That bell," I whispered. "It's the same as before." Packderman's face was grim. "The ghost ship isn't done with you." I looked at my arm. The blackened handprints were darker now. My heart pounded. I wasn't safe. I was still theirs. And the bell was calling me back. The blackened handprints on my arm felt colder now, as if they were sinking into my skin. Packderman wrapped a cloth around them, his hands shaking. "This isn't just a mark," he muttered. "This is a curse." I swallowed hard. "A curse for what?" Captain Surya exhaled sharply. "For being brought back." Hira's voice was unsteady. "Brought back, by what?" No one answered. But I knew. I wasn't just saved from drowning. Something let me go. And whatever it was still watching. For a moment, everything was silent. Just the sound of our paddles, the gentle lapping of the water. But then, the fog rolled in again. Fast. Thick. Wrong. Hira cursed. "It's back." Captain Surya stood abruptly, gripping the tiller. No. This is different. Pac squinted into the mist. Then his face drained of color. We're not alone. I turned. And froze. Shapes moved in the fog. Not human. Not drowned. Something else. And they were coming toward us. The figures slid through the mist, their bodies too tall, too thin. Their faces were hidden, obscured by the shifting fog. But I could feel their eyes on me. One of them stopped just at the edge of the boat. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. Then, slowly it raised a hand. And pointed directly at me. The fog whispered around us, voices rising and falling like a distorted chant. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. Then, the boat jolted violently. Something beneath us was moving. The water swelled. And a hand shot out of the sea. It was massive. Gray, bloated, its fingers longer than my arm. It grabbed the side of the boat, tilting it violently. Hiro screamed. It's pulling us under. Pac hacked at it with his knife. The blade sank in, but the hand didn't let go. More hands emerged, gripping the edges of the lifeboat. They weren't trying to sink us. They were trying to take me. I felt my body being dragged forward. Captain Surya grabbed me. Don't let go. I clawed at the wood, fighting against the pull. Then, in the fog, I saw him. Danny. Standing on the water. His black eyes locked onto mine. And then he smiled. The deep bell rang again. Louder. The fog trembled, shifting unnaturally. The hands recoiled, sinking back into the water. The watchers in the mist vanished. And Danny. He was gone. The ocean fell silent. Pac slumped forward, his face pale with exhaustion. Hiro was breathing heavily, gripping his chest. I looked down at my arm. The black handprints had spread. Dark veins now stretched up toward my shoulder. Captain Surya's voice was low. This isn't over. I looked toward the horizon. The ghost ship wasn't there. But I knew it would return. Because the bell was still ringing in my head. And I wasn't sure if I was still alive, or already dead. The sea was too quiet. No waves. No wind. No sound except the distant echo of the bell, still ringing in my head. I clutched my arm, feeling the dark veins pulse beneath my skin. What's happening to me? I whispered. Pac looked grim. The sea has claimed you. You're, in between. I frowned. In between what? He didn't answer. Captain Surya's grip tightened on the tiller. We need to move. Now. Hiro nodded, but his face was pale. He kept glancing at the water, as if expecting something to rise from below. We all felt it. The ocean wasn't finished with me. And it was just waiting to take me back. The first sign was the heat. It started slow, a gentle warmth under the boat. Then, within seconds, the sea began to boil. Steam rose around us, the water bubbling and hissing like it had been set on fire. Hiro yelped and pulled his hand away. His fingers were red, as if burned. What the hell? Pac grabbed a rope, his eyes darting toward the mist. This isn't natural. The water churned violently, and then the lifeboat started sinking. Not from weight. Not from a hole. But as if something beneath us was pulling it down. And then, in the bubbling water, I saw them. Faces. Hundreds of faces. Mouths wide open in a silent scream. The boiling water churned, and hands shot up from below. They were pale, bloated, their fingers long and clawed. One of them grabbed my ankle. The heat was unbearable, like I was being branded with fire. I kicked and thrashed, but their grip only tightened. More hands wrapped around my legs, my waist, my arms. I was being dragged down. Hiro lunged forward. Hold on. Pac hacked at the hands with his knife, but it was useless. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. And then, I felt something cold against my neck. A whisper. Come back to us. The voices surrounded me. I saw their eyes, empty and endless. The drowned were pulling me into their world. I gasped, my lungs filling with salt and fire. Then, Captain Surya shouted something. A flare erupted in the air, burning bright red. The light pierced the mist, and for a split second, the drowned let go. I gasped for air, coughing up seawater. Hiru and Pakderman dragged me back into the boat, my body trembling violently. The boiling sea cooled instantly. The mist began to fade. But the voices, they were still whispering in my ears. We drifted in silence. The sky above was dark, the ocean calm again. But I knew it wasn't over. The bell had stopped ringing. And that scared me more than anything. Captain Surya turned to me, his face hard. They'll come again. Pakderman nodded. They won't stop. Not until they take what's theirs. I swallowed. I didn't need to ask. I knew exactly what that meant. I was already half gone. And soon, the sea would come for the rest of me. We drifted under the moonless sky. No one spoke. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Pakderman wrapped my arm in cloth, but it didn't help. The black veins beneath my skin had spread past my shoulder. Does it hurt? Hiru asked. I shook my head. That was the problem. It didn't hurt. I wasn't even sure if my arm still belonged to me. Captain Surya finally broke the silence. We have two choices. Pakderman sighed. Neither of them are good. I forced myself to ask. What choices? Surya's voice was grim. We keep drifting and wait for help, or we go back. My breath caught. Back. Back to the fog. Back to the bell. Back to whatever was waiting for me. Before we could decide, the boat jolted. Not like a wave. Not like the wind. It felt like something underneath us had moved. I met Hiru's eyes. He felt it too. Captain Surya's hands were steady on the tiller. Something's down there. Pakderman grabbed his knife. It's been following us. I leaned over the edge, peering into the water. Darkness. Nothing but an endless, black void. And then, a shape. Massive. Moving. Watching. And in the reflection of the water, I saw a face. My face. But it wasn't me. The other me in the water smiled. A slow, unnatural grin that didn't belong to me. Its eyes were too dark, too deep. Like they weren't eyes at all. Then, it moved. Not the water. Not the boat. My reflection moved on its own. It reached up. I stumbled back just as the hand burst through the water. Wet fingers grazed my skin before I tore away, gasping. Pakderman yanked me back. Don't look at it. Captain Surya's voice was sharp. What did you see? I shook my head. My chest was tight. My hands were trembling. Me, I whispered. Hiru's face went pale. But it wasn't just fear. It was recognition. He had seen something too. The ocean was still again. But I knew it was a lie. Something was changing. Then, out of nowhere, a voice whispered my name. Soft. Close. Inside my head. Come back. Come back to us. The whisper turned into laughter. Wet. Hollow. Wrong. Pakderman muttered under his breath, gripping his amulet. We shouldn't have left the sea behind. Hiru wiped his face. We never did. Captain Surya's grip tightened on the tiller. They won't let us go. I clenched my fists. I already knew that. Because the whisper in my head was my own voice. We had been drifting for hours. No land. No stars. Only the endless, black sea. Then, a shape appeared on the horizon. At first, I thought it was an island. But then, the mist shifted. And I saw the sails. The broken mast. The rotting wood. The ship. The ghost ship. It hadn't disappeared. It had been waiting for us. Captain Surya inhaled sharply. We have to turn back. Hackderman's hands trembled. It's too late. Hira's voice was barely a whisper. We never left. The bell tolled once more. And this time, I knew what it meant. It was calling for me. The ghost ship loomed ahead, its torn sails flapping despite the dead air. I wanted to believe it was an illusion. That my mind was playing tricks. But I knew better. The ship was real. And worse. It was moving toward us. Captain Surya cursed under his breath. This isn't possible. Hackderman grabbed the tiller. Turn us around. Now. Surya tried. But the rudder wouldn't budge. The ocean wasn't letting us go. Hira clutched my arm. We can't be here. I swallowed hard. Then why are we? The bell on the ghost ship tolled again. And in the silence that followed, I heard something worse. The creaking of wood. Something was moving on that ship. Something was waking up. A shadow emerged from the fog. One step. Then another. A man, or something like one, stood on the ghost ship's bow. His face was covered in salt-crusted bandages. His hands were bloated and blackened. And when he lifted his head, his eyes were gone. Hackderman gripped his knife. Don't move. I barely breathed. Then, more shadows appeared behind him. Dozens of them. Men with hollow eyes. Their skin was split and swollen. Their mouths hung open. As if they were still screaming underwater. They weren't just spirits. They were the crew. And they had been waiting for us. One figure stepped forward. Taller than the rest. His coat was tattered, but his captain's insignia was still visible. His hat dripped with seawater. His face was a mask of rot and ruin. And when he spoke, it was in a voice I recognized. You took what was ours. The words wrapped around me like chains. Return it, or take its place. My head pounded. The black veins on my arm burned. I had no idea what he meant. But I knew one thing. He was talking to me. The ship creaked as the captain stepped closer. The other crew members remained motionless. I forced myself to speak. Took what? The captain's rotting lips curled. He raised one hand. And pointed at my chest. You know. The black veins throbbed. Memories I didn't recognize flooded my mind. Dark water. Hands pulling me under. A whisper, come back to us. I gasped, gripping the side of the boat. No. No, this wasn't possible. I had never been on that ship before. Had I? Captain Surya stood beside me. We need to go. The ghostly captain tilted his head. You cannot leave. The crew behind him moved in unison. Silent. Slow. Unstoppable. I turned to Pack-Derman. His face was grim. There's only one way out. Hira's voice shook. What way? Derman locked eyes with me. You have to remember. The air around us grew heavy. The ocean stilled. And deep in my chest, something clicked. A memory I had buried. A truth I wasn't ready to face. And as it surfaced, the crew of the dead began to smile. Because they knew. I was already one of them. My head pounded. The ghost captain's words wrapped around my mind, tightening like ropes. You took what was ours. Return it, or take its place. My chest burned. The black veins on my arm throbbed. And then, the ocean vanished. For a moment, I wasn't on the boat. I wasn't even myself. I was somewhere else. Someone else. The memory rushed in like a wave. Dark water. A sinking ship. Screams swallowed by the sea. And I was there. Not just watching. I was one of them. In the vision, I stood on the deck of the ghost ship. The storm raged around us. Lightning split the sky. Men cried out, scrambling as the ship tilted. And then, the captain turned to me. But he wasn't a corpse. Not yet. His eyes were full of rage. "You made a deal." My throat tightened. No. This wasn't me. This wasn't my life. But it felt real. More real than the boat. More real than the present. And deep inside, I knew the truth. I had been here before. I had betrayed them. The vision shattered. I gasped, gripping the edge of the boat. The ocean was back. The ghost ship loomed over us. And the dead captain was still staring at me. "Now you remember." My pulse raced. Hiro was shaking me. What the hell just happened? Pact face was grim. He saw. Captain Surya's hands were white on the tiller. "We need to leave. Now." But the dead captain raised his hand. The ocean stopped moving. The waves froze. Even the wind held its breath. And then he said it. "You are already dead." I shook my head. No. No, I wasn't dead. I couldn't be. But then, the black veins burned hotter. And I heard it again. The bell. Tolling for me. Return what was stolen. Pac gritted his teeth. "Don't listen." The dead captain stepped forward. The entire crew followed. One step. Then another. Closer. Reaching. "Come back." The waves beneath us rippled. Something moved under the boat. Something massive. The sea had made its decision. Captain Surya yanked the tiller. Pac grabbed his amulet, whispering a prayer. Hiro held onto me. What do we do? I couldn't answer. Because a part of me already knew. The sea had claimed me once. It wanted me back. And the truth was, maybe I had never left. The black veins crawled up my neck. My fingers felt wrong. Like they belonged to someone else. Like I was already turning into one of them. And then, the ocean opened beneath us. And the sea swallowed us whole. The ocean split open. A chasm of black water gaped beneath us. No bottom. No light. Just endless, crushing darkness. And we were falling. I tried to scream, but water rushed into my mouth. The cold wrapped around me like hands. Pulling. Dragging. The last thing I saw before the water swallowed us was the dead captain's smile. He had been waiting for this. For me. Everything was silent. No sound. No movement. Just the endless deep. I was sinking, but I felt weightless. Like I had been here before. Like this was where I was meant to be. Then, a whisper. "You took our place." I turned. The crew of the dead was floating around me. Their eyes hollow. Their mouths open. But the whispers weren't coming from them. They were coming from inside me. A shape loomed beneath us. I squinted. No. It wasn't possible. It was the ship. The ghost ship. But it wasn't floating. It was waiting at the bottom of the sea. Torn sails drifting like jellyfish tentacles. Its deck half buried in the abyss. And as we sank deeper, the ship came alive. The bell tolled. The crew opened their rotting arms. Welcoming us. Welcoming me. The dead captain stood on the deck. Whole again. His eyes burning like dying stars. "You cannot escape what you are." The pressure crushed my chest. Memories exploded in my head. The storm. The deal. The betrayal. I had traded their lives to save my own. And now, they were taking me back. The ship's deck rose up beneath us. Our boat was gone. Pac Hiro, Captain Surya. They were here with me. Trapped. The captain stepped closer. The dead crew circled us. "Welcome home." The black veins on my arms spread over my entire body. My lungs burned. The sea was inside me now. And as I looked down at my hands, they were already turning to bone. Because this was never a nightmare. This was never a ghost story. This was what had been waiting for me all along. I was never meant to leave. I was always meant to return. Thank you for listening to this story. But remember, never assume this is just a story. Who knows, something might be listening along with you right now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. But be careful, maybe after this, something else has subscribed behind you. See you in the next tale, and may your night remain peaceful, if it can.